My inability to stop drinking alcohol had nothing to do with alcoholism. My relationship with alcohol had nothing to do with it being a disease or a curse. I battled alcoholism for 13 years, from 24 years old till 37 years old. And until I turned and faced the reasons, or started trying to understand the reasons why I couldn't stop, I never was actually able to stop. And today I'm going to talk about a lot of the reasons why I could not stop drinking alcohol, in the hopes that something resonates with you and offers some hope and clarity for your journey towards quitting alcohol and quitting addiction for good. Welcome back to the Sober Web, my friends. I'm Clark, the host and creator, and I'm so happy that you found this video because we're going to talk about why I couldn't stop drinking alcohol. And I tried so many times. I had relapses. I tried to take months off. I tried to control my drinking by switching from liquor to beer to wine, so on and so forth, but I could never stop. I always went back, and the question is why? Why did I constantly go back when I knew deep down that it wasn't good for me? And well, today we're going to talk about some of those reasons because I bet you probably struggle with them as well, and I want you to know that you're not alone. But first, hit the like button if you're sober, leave your sober date in the comments below, and I hope that you'll consider subscribing to my channel so I can continue to offer you some hope and clarity on your recovery journey. And the first reason that I couldn't stop drinking alcohol once I began to realize it was a problem in my life and it was, alcoholism, or that I was an alcoholic, was that it was a really, really strong habit. Because habits, whether good or bad, are just formed over time through repetition. And around 23 or 24, I began to use alcohol to numb out a lot of shame and guilt and grief in my life because I didn't have a healthy way of dealing with those feelings. And alcohol was just a really effective solution for those feelings that I didn't know how to express, or I had no safe place to express them. And if you know what that feels like, hit the like button for me because I totally get how you feel because I was there once myself. But like I said, alcohol was a really good solution, which is why I think a lot of us fall into this trap of using it so often to escape reality, or to turn off our thinking minds, or to turn off and mute some pain that we can't quite acknowledge or understand, that kind of burns deep in us, but we're too scared to face it because we're not quite sure we're ready to face it or maybe ready to heal it. So through daily use, weekly use, hourly use, whatever it is, we fall into this habitual use of alcohol because it just gets the job done. And before we know it, we've lost track of why we started drinking in the first place, or where it went from being fun to kind of being scary. And the next thing you know, the habit eventually becomes this obsession, this compulsion, which is a form of alcoholism, which actually it is alcoholism, because alcoholism is described as an obsession over alcohol, or a compulsion to use it. And I believe that happens because the use of alcohol has become a really bad habit. And that's why when I first began to acknowledge that I had a drinking problem, that I had a negative relationship with alcohol, it was so hard to stop drinking because the habit was just so deeply rooted, almost in the core of who I was. It almost became my truth in so many ways, because it was the only way that I knew how to cope with life. And not necessarily even life, just the feelings and emotions that I couldn't deal with, or even some other things that we're actually going to talk about in a little bit that have a lot to do with the reasons that I couldn't stop, that I think and hope that you'll understand and connect with, primarily because you'll then know that you're not alone, and you'll know that what you're feeling totally makes sense and doesn't mean that anything is wrong with you. But the beautiful thing about habits is that even if it's a bad habit, habits can be broken. New habits can be formed, and we can break this habit of using alcohol to escape reality. And the first step is just we have to quit drinking alcohol, or we have to quit whatever the addiction is. And by doing so, we put ourselves in this position where we begin to face life on life's terms. We deal with pain and emotion and grief and fear and all these things that we ran from. And by dealing with them on a daily basis, we start building up new habits of how we can deal with all these things in a healthy way instead of using alcohol to take the pain away momentarily. So hit the like button if you understand what I mean. If you feel like your drinking has become a bad habit, it's totally normal, it makes sense, and there's nothing wrong with you. And the best news is that you can break that habit and you can form a new habit. And then the second reason that I had trouble giving up alcohol for good was that, well, I just enjoyed it a lot. I really honestly just really enjoyed getting drunk. I enjoyed the buzz, but the problem for me is that the habit with my alcohol didn't allow me to stop with a couple drinks to have a nice buzz. I would just continue to drink. I would take other people's drinks. That way I would eventually just kind of get really, really messed up and I would black out. So it went from being fun to no longer being fun over the span of years. And part of the problem is that maybe we become addicted to the fact that alcohol makes us feel like we're having fun. It makes us feel like we're part of the cool crowd. It makes us feel like we fit in. It probably makes us feel less awkward if we're not good in social situations. So giving it up or struggling to give it up is that there's this fear of taking away that barrier that we feel protects us or keeps us safe or makes us funny or makes us have fun when we're with other people. So when we start considering giving up alcohol, a lot of things can run through our mind of how am I going to fit in? Am I going to feel awkward around people? How am I going to relate to people? Is it actually going to be fun to go to parties or be at dinner parties or social events or weddings or corporate parties and maybe be the only one that's sober? Although I'm sure that there's other people that are dealing with the same thing that you are that probably are sober as well and probably just need to find an ally. So you're probably not alone even at these situations where you feel like you might be alone. Just FYI. There's also this feeling of concern and fear around, am I going to be bored at parties if I'm not drinking? Or am I going to be bored at home because I can't have a couple glasses of wine to take the edge off and to kind of decompress from my day? And part of it's just changing our mentality around alcohol being fun or that we need it to have fun. So I just want you to know that it's totally normal if you struggle with quitting alcohol because you have a fear of not having fun without it. You're not alone. I totally get it. But as someone who's been sober for a number of years now, I can tell you that actually I have more authentic fun as a sober person compared to when I drank and when I blacked out and when I woke up with hangovers and actually, in retrospect, had absolutely zero fun as it was. Now, I've already mentioned this next reason quite a few times in passing in both the habit-forming conversation and also the fun conversation. But a big reason why I couldn't stop drinking alcohol when I knew that I had a problem was because I was scared. And I only began to understand how my fear drove my drinking and my relationship with alcohol once I got sober. And maybe my fear and being scared around quitting alcohol was more subconscious because I wasn't emotionally aware or spiritually aware enough to understand why I was drinking to escape all this fear in my mind and in my heart. But quitting alcohol for good, if it's become a coping mechanism, if you will, it's a scary idea what that means without that kind of protective barrier between you and the world. There's so much fear involved in quitting alcohol because we might be afraid of having to admit that there's a problem. We might be afraid of having to state that maybe we're an alcoholic. Quitting alcohol oftentimes forces change, so we might be afraid of what that looks like, what that's going to feel like. There's also this fear of the fact that if we stop drinking alcohol, we have to face reality. And everyone's reality is completely different. But most of our realities, if we use alcohol as a coping mechanism, as a way to numb out or turn our minds off, has to do with us running away from some pain in the past, some trauma, some grief, some toxicity, some sadness, something that turned your relationship with alcohol from one that was kind of fun into something that was a necessity, something that you were afraid to be without. And in a video where I talk about how I get sober in 24 hours, which is right there, I actually talk about how fear is the root of everything. And fear keeps us stuck in our alcohol use. But fear also drives us to alcohol use. Fear is actually the driving factor behind why we even start using alcohol in such a habitual way that we can't put it down even when we know it's no good for us. And so it's such a hard thing to stop drinking alcohol for good because it represents just so many things that you're going to have to face now that you don't get to escape from in a bottle or even in any type of addiction. And I don't want you to be scared about the idea of being afraid of quitting alcohol. I don't know if that's a double entendre, an oxymoron, being afraid of fear. But it's okay to be afraid of what life looks like outside of quitting alcohol. But don't let that fear keep you trapped in this cycle that's probably not working anymore. Hit the like button if you understand what I'm talking about. And if you're courageous enough to actually leave a comment with some fears that you struggle with, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what kind of fear keeps you trapped. What are you afraid of that keeps you drinking alcohol or feeling like you can't stop? And I just want you to know that I know how scary it is because when I got sober, I had to change pretty much my entire life. And a lot of that fear around having to change things so drastically is what kept me drinking a lot in 2016 and 2017, even when I knew that my drinking had to stop. But the only way for us to truly progress in life and to truly move past addiction and to move past this limiting way of living with alcohol or some addiction that holds us back is that we have to face our fears. And we can try to delay the inevitable every single day by using alcohol to numb out and to turn the fear off. The problem is that the alcohol wears off, the addiction wears off, and we are forced to deal with fear yet again. And it's just exhausting, my friend, to try to escape that fear on a daily basis, especially with alcohol that just destroys us in so many ways. But just like habits can be broken and good habits can be formed, fear can be broken. It doesn't mean that the rest of your life is going to be fearless and completely free of fear. But if you're able to stop drinking alcohol for good and face the fears that kept you in the alcohol or maybe drove you to the addiction and to the alcohol, it will level up your life in amazing ways that will allow you to just continue forming all of these new amazing habits that let you deal with reality and life on life's terms. And another reason that I couldn't stop drinking alcohol even when I knew that it was no good for me was because of my grief. And like fear, grief, I believe, is a root of addiction. It is a root of the struggles that we have with alcohol or addiction, or why we feel the need to escape reality or to continually try to run from the pain of the past. Because there is so much grief in the past that we are not acknowledging. I began to understand my grief when my mom died in 2014 from pancreatic cancer, and I became a dad at the same time. My drinking after those two events, both life and death, got worse, which led to 2017 where I got sober for good. But in that span of 3 years, even while I was drinking, I began to understand all of these moments of grief in my life that led up to the moment when I was 24 when my alcoholism came alive, because I suffered a moment of shame and guilt and so much grief that I had no way to deal with it except through alcohol. And it's like my mom's death and my son's birth was that catalyst for the ultimate grief to kind of spill myself completely open so that I had to start healing and getting sober in one way or another. But as I got closer to accepting that I was an alcoholic and I had to overcome alcoholism and I had to quit alcohol for good, there was so much grief along with the fear of quitting, sadness about lost dreams, lost ideals, what my life was going to look like, what my life could have been if I'd not ever started drinking alcohol in the first place. There was all this sadness around the idea of quitting for good and what it meant that also just kind of held hands with fear the entire way. So grief has a lot to do with why we can't stop drinking alcohol. And if you're able to be honest with yourself and start thinking about moments in your life that caused you sadness or caused you grief, and I'm not even talking about losing a loved one, because grief comes in many different forms. Grief is loss in one form or another. And oftentimes, along with fear, it is the fuel for the fire that is addiction. But if you can start being introspective and reflective on your own life and moments of pain that maybe represent grief or fear, perhaps you can start to understand why it is that you feel like you're stuck in alcohol use or you're stuck in an addiction. And maybe the ability to quit or the fearlessness or the courage to put aside the grief in order to quit for good doesn't happen today or tomorrow or a week from now. But if you start thinking about it, eventually you can start working up to this moment where you can quit alcohol for good, because you'll have started to deal with the grief and to deal with the fear so that you can stop drinking alcohol once and for all when the moment is right for you. And then a final reason why I could not stop drinking alcohol, which I'm sure that you'll understand and relate to, is that I was in denial. I did not want to accept that I had a problem. I did not want to accept that maybe I was an alcoholic. I didn't want to accept that I was battling alcoholism and had been battling it for so long. But I want you to think about denial as being a construct of a few things, being your ego, your pride, but also being a combination of guilt and shame. That's what denial is. Our ego is this source within us that kind of wants us to be miserable. It wants us to stay in the guilt and shame that feeds the alcohol use or feeds the addiction. It doesn't want us to find the courage to name our problem. It doesn't want us to find the courage to make changes so that we can quit the addiction for good. And so it kind of fires up this pride in us that I don't have a problem. I can control my drinking. I'm gonna prove that I can actually control this. I'm gonna take a few months off, and when I go back, I'll have one drink, and I know that I can stop. But that's just the ego telling you lies. Because if you're already at a place in your life where you know that maybe alcohol is no good for you without even labeling it, the only reason we question that gut in us is because the ego wants us to believe that we need alcohol or we need the addiction. But really, the ego is just holding us back, and it uses guilt and shame to keep us in that cycle of alcohol use and misuse. You know, it uses our pride against us to keep us from asking for help or admitting that we need help. And really, if you know anything about grief, denial is a huge part of grief. It's how we protect ourselves from the idea that we have lost something. So if you think about this entire conversation, fear, grief, habits, and now denial, it all works together. Because ultimately, we're in denial that not only do we have a problem, but we're in denial that there's a pain in the past that we need to heal. We're in denial that we're sad about something that feeds the drinking. We're in denial that we're scared of life without alcohol. We're in denial about the fact that we might have to do some work around trauma or toxicity in our life that has driven our relationship with alcohol. And if you're in that boat, my friend, and you know how all this feels, please hit that like button, because I've been there. And along the way, there was many aha moments where I knew something was wrong. Not necessarily wrong with me, that just something was off. But I was so scared and I was so sad that I didn't have the means or the strength or the courage in those moments to do something about it then. And life kept on going, and I kept on using alcohol when I was sad. I kept on using alcohol when I was afraid. I thought it was fun, but eventually it wasn't fun anymore. And then eventually it got out of control and became so dark and insidious, I knew once and for all that it had to go. But even when I accepted that in 2017 and said I was an alcoholic for the first time, I relapsed 3 times after that. And so wherever you're at on your journey, I want you to be kind to yourself. Because even if these reasons speak to you and you know what I'm talking about, it doesn't mean that everything has to change right here, right now. I hope that it does. I would love for that to happen today, for you to quit alcohol once and for all. But like my journey, it was a journey of progressions. It was one of small steps working towards finally quitting alcohol for good after trying so many and so many times. And the most beautiful thing is that the reasons that I couldn't stop drinking alcohol became the reasons that I was able to stop drinking alcohol, which can be the same for you. Because by facing the grief and facing the fear, we then get to step out of this addictive mentality that's been holding us back for so long. By finally stepping away from the shadow of denial, we can begin to see that there's nothing wrong with us, and that there is hope, and that there are possibilities, and that there is a solution for our problem, which an addiction or alcohol never will be needed ever again. And as you deal with the fear and the grief, and you break the bad habit, and you start forming good habits, your mind, your body, your spirit, it will start to deal with life and face life in such an amazing way that eventually you'll just kind of laugh at the idea that you ever even drank alcohol in the first place. And then you'll realize that being able to quit alcohol and stay sober was just the beginning of your sobriety journey. And the courage and the strength and the resilience that you used and tapped into in order to stop drinking alcohol once and for all will then start radiating out and changing your life and even those around you in so many ways. So there you have it, my friends. 5 reasons why I couldn't stop drinking alcohol even when I knew I had to stop drinking. I want you to keep in mind that there's absolutely no shame and guilt in your journey and where you're at. I hope something in the conversation today resonated with you and at least maybe helped you have an aha moment in one way or another. But remember, it's honestly baby steps. You can't solve this stuff overnight. You can't heal it all overnight. But at least if you are beginning to become aware of grief and fear and how it works in the addiction, in the alcohol use, and even how it led you to all of that, you can begin to heal it and break the hold of all of that stuff on you. I really believe it. It worked for me, and I do believe that it can work for everyone. So hit that like button if you found the video valuable. In the comments below, let me know what reasons spoke to you, but maybe even better yet, let me know some reasons that you have that you feel are a sticking point about quitting alcohol for good. If you know anyone that could benefit from this video, I really hope that you'll share it with them. And of course, I really hope that you'll consider subscribing to the channel so I can continue to offer you some hope and clarity on your recovery journey. And after you hit the subscribe button, please hit the bell. That way you're notified when I release a video every single week. Until we talk again, my friends, I hope that you'll check out that video right there. But much love and much life. I'm Clark with the Sober Webb, and I'll talk to you really soon.